The metallic creak of the old Peterbilt truck's door echoed through the abandoned area, sending a shiver down Kyle Carter's spine. His 15 years of experience as an urban treasure hunter had never prepared him for what he was about to discover. On that freezing October morning in Nevada. "Rodriguez, you need to see this," Kyle called out to his partner, his voice trembling slightly as his eyes remained fixed on the dark interior of the abandoned vehicle. Miguel Rodriguez, who was photographing an old ore processing plant a few meters away, approached with his professional camera still hanging from his neck. The pair had met during an Urban Explorers convention in Phoenix 5 years ago, and had since become inseparable in their search for relics of America's industrial past. "What did you find this time, partner?" "Another collection of old license plates," Rodriguez joked, but his smile instantly disappeared when he saw the serious expression on Kyle's face. The inside of the truck was surprisingly clean compared to its corroded exterior. On the driver's seat, a small package moved gently. Kyle leaned inside his heart, racing with every inch he got closer. The soft sound of a child crying confirmed his worst fears. "Oh my God," whispered Rodriguez, his camera slipping from his trembling hands and being saved only by the strap around his neck. There, wrapped in apparently new blankets and a fluorescent yellow vest, was a baby who couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. Her skin had reddish patches, and visible peeling an unusual pattern that extended all over her exposed little body. Kyle, a father of 2, felt his stomach turn. Carefully, he reached for the small package, noticing a folded note attached to his vest. The handwritten words were almost illegible, blurred by what looked like tears. "Please take care of him. We can't anymore. His illness, the treatments. Forgive us." Rodriguez was already on the phone to the authorities, his normally calm voice now charged with urgency. They were in the remote region of Battle Mountain, Nevada, an area known for its old mining operations and abandoned vehicles. The location was approximately 2 hours from Reno, and every minute would be crucial for the baby's well-being. "The police are on their way," said Rodriguez, "along with an ambulance. They told us not to move the baby unless absolutely necessary." Kyle nodded, keeping a hand gently on the little body to make sure it was warm. Fall in Nevada could be merciless, with temperatures plummeting rapidly after sunrise. Fortunately, the blankets seemed to have protected the child well from the cold of the night before. "Who would do that, Miguel?" Kyle asked, his voice laced with emotion. "Leave a sick baby here in the middle of nowhere?" Rodriguez removed his coat and handed it to Kyle, who used it to create an extra layer of protection around the baby. "Desperation makes people make terrible decisions, buddy." The next 45 minutes seemed like an eternity. The baby alternated between periods of sleep and soft crying, while Kyle and Rodriguez kept vigil, talking in low voices to keep the little one calm. When the sirens finally cut through the silence of the desert, both men felt immense relief. The arrival of the authorities turned the abandoned site into an active investigation scene. Paramedics quickly assessed the baby, confirming that despite the adverse conditions, he was stable. Detective Lauren Mills, a middle-aged woman with piercing eyes and a determined demeanor, began gathering information. "Are you urban explorers?" asked Mills, observing the professional photographic equipment and the backpacks loaded with specialized tools. "Yes, ma'am," replied Kyle. "We document abandoned historical sites to preserve their memory. We never imagined we'd find this." The detective took detailed notes while Kyle and Rodriguez described their discovery. Preliminary analysis of the note and the materials left with the baby already provided some clues. The yellow vest was new, bought at a department store in Elko, about 100 miles to the east. The blankets still had labels from a local pharmacy. "We're going to trace these purchases," Mills explained. "Security cameras, credit card records these days, it's hard not to leave a trace." As the investigation unfolded, Kyle couldn't take his eyes off the ambulance where the baby was being prepared for transport. His skin condition, according to the paramedics, appeared to be a rare form of ichthyosis, a genetic disease that affects the skin's ability to develop normally. "Treatment for these conditions can cost tens of thousands of dollars a year," commented one of the paramedics, shaking his head sadly. That morning's discovery would change Kyle and Rodriguez's lives forever. What began as another day of exploration turned into something much bigger. A story of desperation, impossible choices, and the unpredictable fate that sometimes brings strangers together in the most unexpected ways. As the ambulance set off towards the nearest hospital, Kyle felt the weight of his camera in his hands. The photos he had planned to take that day would be replaced by very different images evidence that would help unravel the mystery behind the abandoned baby in the Nevada desert. Detective Mills closed his notebook and looked at the two explorers. "We're going to need you for more statements. This investigation is just getting started." Kyle and Rodriguez exchanged determined glances. Their quest for history and adventure had turned into a much more meaningful mission to find answers to a mystery that touched on deep questions about love, despair, and the limits of parental sacrifice. The investigation gathered pace within 48 hours of the baby's discovery. Detective Mills set up his makeshift headquarters in the small Battle Mountain Police Department, where photos, receipts, and medical reports were beginning to form a mosaic of the unfolding tragedy. Kyle and Rodriguez, still shaken by the discovery, decided to stay in town. The Sunset Inn, a modest motel on Main Street, became their temporary base. The morning after the discovery, Mills called them together for a meeting that would change the course of the investigation. "The security cameras at the pharmacy in Elko gave us our first concrete lead," Mills explained, projecting the grainy images onto the wall of the meeting room. "A young woman about 25 buying the same blankets found with the baby. Time of purchase, 7:43 p.m. the day before yesterday." Kyle looked closely at the figure on the screen. Brown hair, tied back in a careless ponytail, shoulders bowed under the weight of what seemed to be more than just physical fatigue. His hands were visibly shaking as he paid for his purchase. "The interesting thing," Mills continued, "is that she paid in cash but used a pharmacy loyalty card. The name on the register is Alice Whitman." Rodriguez, who was photographing the evidence panels for documentation, paused his work. "Whitman like the Whitmans from the cattle ranch to the north." The mention of the name caused a stir in the room. Whitman Farm was well known in the region, a property that had been in the family for 3 generations. Mills nodded, her eyes revealing that she had already made the connection. Alice Whitman, 26, married James Whitman, 29. They registered the birth of a baby boy 6 weeks ago at Elko Regional Hospital, Mills revealed, spreading more documents out on the table. The baby was diagnosed with a severe form of lamellar ichthyosis shortly after birth. Kyle felt his stomach turn as he read the medical report. The condition was severe, requiring intensive care and expensive treatments. Annual cost estimates exceeded $2,000, far beyond the resources of a family farm struggling to survive in times of drought. "Records show they tried to get insurance coverage for the treatment," Mills continued. "They were denied 3 times. The condition was classified as pre-existing." Rodriguez lowered his camera, his voice laden with emotion. "So they chose to abandon their own child?" "It's not that simple," a female voice interrupted from the doorway. Dr. Rachel Chen, a pediatrician from the local hospital who was taking care of the baby, entered the room. "Untreated lamellar ichthyosis can cause extreme suffering. Without proper care, the skin becomes extremely thick, scaly, and can crack, causing intense pain and the risk of fatal infections." The silence that followed was heavy. Kyle thought of his own daughters, the privilege of having them healthy, the comfort of being able to take them to the doctor when necessary. "How is he?" Kyle asked Dr. Chen. "Stable. We've started basic treatment, but," she hesitated, "without a long-term plan, his future is uncertain." Mills picked up his keys. "We have enough for a visit to Whitman Farm. Mr. Carter, Mr. Rodriguez, would you like to accompany us? Your observation skills could be useful." The farm was 40 minutes from the city, a modest but well-kept property. As they approached, they saw a young man repairing a fence. He stopped his work when he saw the vehicles, his face paling. "James Whitman," Mills called out, flashing his badge. The man didn't answer, but his hand squeezed the tool he was holding hard enough for his knuckles to turn white. "Where's Alice?" Mills asked softly. She's not well," James replied, his voice almost a whisper. "Since—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Tears began to stream down his dust-covered face. Kyle watched the scene with a lump in his throat. The despair was palpable. It was in the rusty tools scattered around the yard in the windows, with broken glass barely patched up in the general state of a property that had clearly seen better days. Mills approached James carefully. "We need to talk about your son." The young farmer collapsed, falling to his knees in the red Nevada dirt. We tried so hard," he sobbed. "We sold almost all the cattle, mortgaged the ranch, but it wasn't enough. He cried day and night in pain, and there was nothing we could do." Rodriguez discreetly documented the scene with his camera, each click, capturing not just images, but the crushing weight of the impossible choices that family had faced. "We thought someone would find him soon," James continued. "There are always people exploring that area, tourists, photographers." "How did you know that?" Kyle asked, a sudden realization hitting him. I follow your blog," James admitted, looking at Kyle and Rodriguez. "You posted about exploring that region last week. That's why we chose that place." The revelation hit Kyle like a punch in the gut. His posts, intended to share adventures and preserve history, had inadvertently become part of a plan born of the deepest desperation. Mills signaled to his officers. "Mr. Whitman, you're under arrest. We need you to take us to Alice." While James was being handcuffed, Kyle noticed a small teddy bear lying near the porch of the house. It was worn, clearly much loved, with stains that suggested attempts to clean it very carefully, probably to protect the baby's sensitive skin. The tragedy had many faces, and none of them were easy to judge. The Whitman home revealed an even more painful story than Kyle and Rodriguez had imagined. Alice was sitting motionless in the kitchen, her gaze lost through the window overlooking the parched fields. On the table, dozens of scattered papers told the silent story of a losing battle. Medical bills, denial letters from insurance companies, leaflets about experimental treatments, and a diary detailing every moment of the baby's deteriorating health. "Ms. Whitman." Detective Mills spoke softly. "We need to talk about your son." Alice didn't answer immediately. Her fingers traced invisible patterns on the worn wood of the table. When she finally spoke, her voice was only a whisper. "You found him." It wasn't a question. Kyle noticed a series of photographs stuck to the fridge with worn magnets. In one of them, Alice was holding her newborn baby, her radiant smile contrasting drastically with her current appearance. Next to it, a more recent photo showed the little one with his skin already showing the signs of the disease. "His name is Nathan," Alice continued, now looking directly at Mills. "We named him after James' grandfather. He built this farm from scratch." Rodriguez discreetly captured images of the surroundings, documenting not only evidence, but also the story of a family torn apart. Each photo revealed another piece of the puzzle prescriptions on the counter, a crib carefully assembled in the next room, toys still in their packaging, gifts that Nathan never got to use. "We tried every assistance program possible," James explained, still handcuffed but allowed to sit next to his wife. "We even sold part of the land to a developer, but the costs were like trying to empty the ocean with a leaky bucket." Dr. Chen, who had accompanied the team, examined the prescriptions scattered around the house. "You were trying to treat his condition at home," Alice nodded slowly. "We used all the medicines we could buy, creams, ointments. I spent nights researching alternative treatments on the internet. We tried everything in our power." Kyle felt a lump in his throat as he noticed a calendar hanging on the wall. Each day was marked with meticulous notes about Nathan's care medication schedules, observations about his skin temperature records. The last day marked was exactly 2 days before the abandonment. "What changed?" Mills asked gently. "Why did you choose that particular time?" Alice stood up abruptly, her wobbly legs carrying her to a kitchen drawer. From there she pulled out a crumpled envelope. This arrived last week. The last appeal denied by the insurance, they said. Her voice faltered. They said that without proper treatment, Nathan could develop a fatal infection in a matter of months. Dr. Chen examined the document, her professional eyes quickly scanning the medical information. The assessment is correct. Without specialized treatment, the risk is extremely high. We couldn't watch our son die slowly, James interjected, tears streaming down his dust-covered face. We knew that if he was found, the authorities would have to provide treatment. The system would have to help him. Mills signaled to his officers, who approached with tense expressions. Alice Whitman, you are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. The rest of the words were lost in the sound of Alice's restrained crying as she let herself go without resistance. Kyle watched as the couple were escorted out of the house, each in a different car. The midday sun cast harsh shadows over the property, as if nature itself was highlighting the contrast between hope and despair that had led to that moment. Rodriguez lowered his camera, his hands shaking slightly. You know what's most disturbing, Kyle? They may have done the wrong thing for the right reasons. Dr. Chen, still analyzing the medical records she had found, sighed heavily. The system has failed this family on every possible level. And now, ironically, Nathan will receive the treatment he needed, but his parents will face the legal consequences of having tried to save him in the only way they could find. Yachayur. Mills returned to the kitchen after overseeing the transportation of the Whitmans. We're going to need all this documentation as evidence. Mr. Rodriguez, your photos will be especially important in establishing the full context of the situation. Kyle walked through the house one last time, his professional urban explorer's eye now focused on documenting not ruins of the past, but the traces of a shattered present. In the baby's room, he found a handmade mobile hanging over the empty crib, little hand-carved wooden horses, probably the work of James. What happens to Nathan now? Kyle asked Dr. Chen as she organized the medical documents in her briefcase. He will be placed in state custody, she explained. He'll receive the necessary treatment through the social welfare system. But his future? Well, that will depend on many factors. As the team prepared to leave the farm, Kyle noticed something that had escaped his initial attention, a small notebook on the nightstand in the master bedroom. Opening it, he found pages, and pages of letters, all addressed to Nathan, written by Alice and James, explaining their actions, expressing their love, begging for forgiveness. The last entry, dated the night of the abandonment, ended with a sentence that captured the essence of the tragedy. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go, even when it means breaking your own heart. Kyle handed the notebook to Detective Mills, knowing that those words carried the weight of an impossible decision, one that would continue to echo through the lives of everyone involved for a long time to come. The Lander County Courthouse was unusually busy that Wednesday morning. News of the Whitman case had spread quickly throughout the region, attracting not only the local press, but also children's rights activists and healthcare reform advocates. Kyle and Rodriguez were waiting in the hallway of the courthouse, called as the main witnesses. Through the large glass windows, the Nevadan desert sun cast elongated shadows on the polished marble floor. 3 weeks had passed since Nathan's discovery, and each day brought new revelations about the complexity of the case. How is he? Kyle asked Dr. Chen, who had just arrived for the preliminary hearing. She had become the person primarily responsible for Nathan's treatment at Reno Children's Hospital. Responding well to treatment, she replied, adjusting her glasses. Access to the right medication has made a noticeable difference. But, she hesitated, the monthly cost of treatment is astronomical. It confirms exactly what the Whitmans were facing. The door to the courtroom opened, and the bailiff began calling those present. Kyle watched as Alice and James were led inside, handcuffed but dressed in civilian clothes. Alice looked like she had aged years in the last few weeks, her face scarred by nights of poor sleep. James kept his eyes down his shoulders, bowed under the weight of the situation. Prosecutor Margaret Walsh, a middle-aged woman known for her stern stance in child neglect cases, laid out the charges with surgical precision. Aggravated child abandonment, criminal negligence, intentional exposure to risk. Each charge felt like a stab in the Whitmans' heart. The public defender assigned to the case, David Haskell, stood up. His defense strategy focused on the systemic failure that had led to the couple's despair. "Your Honor, before we try these people as criminals, we need to examine the circumstances that led them to this impossible decision." Kyle was called to testify. From the witness chair, he described that fateful morning in detail, but also shared his observations of the Whitman farm, the meticulous records of Nathan's care, the evidence of his desperate efforts to get treatment. Mr. Carter, Prosecutor Walsh, questioned, "As a father, can you imagine any circumstances that would justify abandoning a baby in an abandoned vehicle?" Before Kyle could answer, a high-pitched cry echoed through the room. Alice had collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably. "I just wanted my son to live," she screamed, her voice filled with anguish. "You don't understand, seeing him suffer every day without being able to do anything." Judge Patricia Monroe, known for her wisdom in complex cases, watched the scene carefully. After a moment of tense silence, she addressed the prosecution. "Ms. Walsh, the court would like to hear from Dr. Chen about the child's current medical condition." Rachel Chen presented a detailed report on Nathan's progress under proper treatment. "With access to the necessary medication, his condition is stabilized. However," she added, looking directly at the judge, "if he had not been found and received treatment when he was, the consequences could have been fatal." Rodriguez, sitting in the front row, continued to discreetly document the hearing with his camera. His photos captured not only the legal proceedings but the raw humanity on display in that room, the desperate love in Alice's eyes, the remorse evident on James's face, the growing compassion in the judge's eyes. "This court," Judge Monroe began after hearing all the witnesses, "faces a unique dilemma. We have parents who, motivated by desperation and love, have committed a criminal act in an attempt to save their child. The law is clear on child abandonment, but we must also consider the exceptional circumstances of this case." The room remained completely silent as the judge continued, "I propose an alternative sentence. The defendants will serve supervised probation for 3 years with mandatory community service in programs that support families with children who need special medical care." Prosecutor Walsh began to protest, but the judge held up her hand, silencing her. "In addition, I order the Department of Social Services to work with the family to establish a reunification plan conditioned on participation in family therapy and demonstration of ability to provide necessary care for Nathan." Kyle watched tears of relief run down Alice and James's faces. The sentence offered not only punishment, but also a path to redemption and recovery. After the hearing in the hallway of the courthouse, Dr. Chen approached the Whitmans with additional news. "We were able to include Nathan in an experimental treatment program. The costs will be covered by medical research." The revelation provoked a new wave of emotions. Alice hugged the doctor, unable to express her gratitude in words. James, still handcuffed, just nodded repeatedly, silent tears staining his face. Kyle and Rodriguez watched the scene, aware that their role in this story had been much greater than they had imagined when they went out to explore abandoned vehicles that fateful morning. Their actions had not only saved a life, but also exposed critical flaws in the system that needed to be fixed. "Sometimes," Rodriguez muttered, lowering his camera, "it takes a tragedy to bring about change." The Whitman story had already begun to generate discussions about reforming the healthcare system and providing greater support for families with children who need special care. The despair that almost destroyed a family was becoming a catalyst for much-needed change. The visiting room at the Reno Family Rehabilitation Center was a welcoming space decorated with soft colors and comfortable furniture designed to facilitate difficult encounters like the one that was about to take place. 6 weeks had passed since the Whitman sentencing, and today would be the first supervised meeting with Nathan. Alice sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, her hands nervously twisting a handkerchief. James stood by the window watching the movement in the parking lot. The social worker Sandra Martinez was organizing her documents while they waited for Dr. Chen to arrive with Nathan. "Remember," Sandra explained gently, "this is only the first step of many. The reunification process is gradual. We need to respect the time of everyone involved." Kyle, who had been invited to document the process as part of a series of reports on healthcare reform, stood discreetly in a corner of the room. His presence there was the result of an unexpected bond he had developed with the family during the weeks of the trial. The sound of footsteps in the corridor made Alice hold her breath. The door opened and Dr. Chen entered carrying Nathan. The baby, now almost 3 months old, was visibly healthier. His skin, still marked by the condition, showed clear signs of improvement under proper treatment. "Hello, little warrior," Alice whispered, her voice laced with emotion. James approached slowly, his face a mixture of love and apprehension. Dr. Chen sat between the parents, adjusting Nathan on her lap so that they could both see him clearly. "He is responding exceptionally well to the experimental treatment. The new medications are controlling the inflammation, and the topical therapy is helping to keep the skin properly hydrated." James reached out, hesitantly, gently touching his son's small hand. Nathan gripped his finger with surprising strength, provoking a restrained sob from his father. "The preliminary results of the study are promising," continued Dr. Chen. "The pharmaceutical company responsible for the research has already indicated an interest in expanding the program to other children with similar conditions." The irony didn't escape anyone in the room. The Whitmans' despair had inadvertently paved the way for changes that would benefit other families facing similar challenges. Sandra Martinez opened her briefcase. "Alice, James, you've been making consistent progress in your family therapy sessions and parenting education program. The reports from your supervisors at the support center are also positive." The couple had dedicated every spare moment to volunteer work with other families facing medical crises, turning their traumatic experience into a source of support for others. "We've established a preliminary schedule for more frequent supervised visits," Sandra continued. "If everything continues to progress well, we may start considering home visits in a few months." Alice leaned closer to Nathan, who was now playing with a small teddy bear. "Your room is still exactly as we left it," she said softly. "The farm is different now. We found a way to make it work." It was true. In the weeks after the trial, the local community had mobilized in a surprising way. Rodriguez, using his connections in the media, organized a fundraising campaign that helped the Whitmans restructure the farm. Neighbors took turns doing the heavy lifting, allowing the couple to fulfill their community service obligations. The experimental program will also include financial support for transportation and accommodation during hospital visits, explained Dr. Chen. "It's part of a larger study on the impact of comprehensive family support on treatment success." Kyle watched Nathan yawn and snuggle into Dr. Chen's arms. It was hard to believe that this was the same baby he and Rodriguez had found in that abandoned truck. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was the result of a system that, albeit belatedly, was finally working as it should. "We have a surprise," James said, pulling an envelope out of his jackfruit pocket. "The State University has approved our proposal for a structured support group. We're going to use our experience to help other families navigate the system before they reach the point of despair that we did." Sandra smiled, making notes in her report. "This demonstrates exactly the kind of growth and responsibility we hope to see in the reunification process." The visiting hour passed all too quickly. When it was time to leave, Alice gently kissed Nathan's forehead, her eyes shining with restrained tears. James ran his hand gently through his son's hair, memorizing every detail of his face. "Next week," Dr. Chen promised, "we'll have more time, and we've brought something new for you to try, a special cream that you can apply during your visits. It's important that Nathan associates your touch with comfort and relief." As the couple prepared to leave, Kyle captured one last image. Nathan had fallen asleep, holding tightly to James' finger with one hand and the teddy bear with the other. It was a photo that told not only a story of separation and pain, but also of hope and healing. The deepest scars, Kyle thought, putting away his camera, aren't always the ones we can see. Watching the Whitmans say goodbye to their son, he understood that some wounds, although they never disappear completely, can become a source of strength and transformation. The late afternoon light streamed in through the windows of the rehabilitation center, bathing the room in golden hues. It was a moment of transition, not just from day to night, but from a dark chapter to a future that, although uncertain, held promises of redemption and new beginnings. A year had passed since the fateful morning when Kyle and Rodriguez found Nathan in the abandoned truck. Autumn was once again painting the Nevada desert with its golden hues, but this time the story unfolding was quite different. The Reno Medical Center was busy that Thursday. Kyle walked through the main lobby, his camera hanging around his neck as usual, but now with a different purpose. He wasn't there to document tragedies, but to record a moment of triumph, the opening of the Whitman Clinic for Rare Skin Diseases. Nathan's story had become a catalyst for significant change. The pharmacist responsible for the experimental treatment, impressed by the results, decided to establish a specialized center. The Whitmans, who had become unwitting spokespeople for the cause, now led a support program for families facing similar challenges. "Kyle?" Alice waved from across the hall. She looked like a completely different person from the broken woman he had met a year earlier. Her eyes shone with renewed purpose, and she carried Nathan in her arms with confidence. The boy, now 15 months old, smiled openly, his skin, although still in need of special care, showing a remarkable improvement. "I can hardly believe this day has come," James commented, adjusting the tie that seemed uncomfortable around his neck, accustomed to his work clothes on the farm. "Sometimes I wonder if all this is real." Rodriguez arrived shortly afterwards, his professional camera capturing the moments leading up to the inauguration ceremony. "The magazine is looking forward to the full story," he explained. "This story has touched a lot of people." Dr. Chen emerged from a conference room accompanied by pharmaceutical executives and state government representatives. "You won't believe it," she announced, barely containing her excitement. "The pilot program will be expanded to 5 states next year. And even better, we got approval for full Medicaid coverage of treatment for cases similar to Nathan's." The news was greeted with tears of joy by Alice. It was exactly the kind of change they had fought for, to ensure that no other family had to choose between bankruptcy or abandoning a sick child. "Ladies and gentlemen," Detective Mills's voice surprised everyone. She had become an unexpected ally, using her influence to advocate for changes in welfare policies. "It's time for the ceremony." The auditorium was packed. Families with children suffering from rare skin conditions, health professionals, social workers, and journalists filled every available seat. Kyle strategically positioned himself to capture the moment when Alice, with Nathan in her arms, took the stage to give her speech. "A year ago," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion, "our desperation led us to make a decision that will haunt us forever. But through that darkness we found light. Not just for Nathan, but for all families facing similar battles." James joined her on stage, holding his son's hand as Alice continued. "This clinic represents more than medical treatment. It represents hope, community, and the promise that no family will have to face these challenges alone." Kyle observed the audience through his lens, faces marked by tears, hopeful smiles, looks of deep understanding. Rodriguez, by his side, captured every moment with his characteristic sensitivity. Dr. Chen presented the impressive figures of the pilot program: 75% improvement in the cases treated, a significant reduction in complications, and most importantly, no family forced into bankruptcy by the costs of treatment. "But numbers don't tell the whole story," she emphasized. "The real revolution lies in the comprehensive care model, medical, psychological, and social, that we have developed from the lessons learned from the Nathan case." After the official ceremony, as the guests dispersed for a cocktail, Kyle found a quiet moment with the Whitmans in a side room. Nathan was happily playing with the clinic's other little patients, his infectious laughter echoing through the room. "You know," Alice reflected watching her son, "sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't decided to explore that area on that particular day." Kyle thought about the blog that had unwittingly inspired the choice of the abandonment site. "Maybe some things are meant to be," he replied. "Not the way we expect, but the way it needs to be." James nodded his hand, finding Alice's. "The farm is different now. We've turned part of it into a retreat for families who come from far away for treatment at the clinic. Something about the desert air and the contact with the animals seems to help with recovery." Rodriguez, who had joined them, showed them some of the photos he had just taken on his camera. "Look at this," he said, showing a particularly touching image of Nathan helping another small patient apply protective cream. "Of all the stories we've documented, this is the one I'm most proud to tell." Detective Mills appeared in the doorway now wearing a different badge. She had been promoted to head of the department's new family assistance unit. "Social services will never be the same after this story," she commented. "Sometimes we need to see the system fail completely to find the motivation to fix it." As the sun began to set, painting the Nevada sky in shades of pink and gold, Kyle took one last photo. In it, the Whitmans were gathered by the window, Alice, James, and Nathan, their silhouettes cut out against the desert horizon. It wasn't just a reconstituted family, but a symbol of hope and transformation. "What are you going to do now?" Kyle asked, putting his camera away. Alice smiled, cradling Nathan in her arms. "We'll keep telling our story, because sometimes the deepest scars become bridges to help others cross their own dark valleys." And so as the day drew to a close in Reno, a new story began, no longer one of despair and abandonment, but of healing hope and the extraordinary human capacity to turn tragedy into triumph.